Welcome to Gen Z Deep Dive. I'm your host, Aaron Brown, and we are brought to you by the Institute for Generational Dynamics. We are also brought to you by our sponsor, Opals and Cosmos, or Opals and Cosmos. I just like to pronounce the word Cosmos, who makes quality pens that we enjoy wearing here around the Institute for Generational Dynamics. If you get a chance, go over to the link on the video and check them out. We guarantee you will love their products. So this week we want to remember Halloween at Yale University, specifically the Halloween season in 2015. It's the 4-year anniversary of the protests at Yale University, and this was when Gen Z age students on the campus of Yale caused an uproar. What was the uproar about? Well, in 2015, Yale's administration sent out an email guiding, maybe warning, students to be cautious of how they dressed for an upcoming Halloween festivities. Dr. Erica Christakis, an expert on education and child development, who lectured at Yale while also simultaneously serving as a residential life director, read the email from administration and felt conflicted by the email. Erica decided to respond to the email and questioned whether or not Yale administrators should advise students on their Halloween garb. Sure, maybe this was good for Yale's spirit of avoiding hurt and offense, but she was worried that the growing tendency to cultivate vulnerability in students carries unacknowledgeable costs. She questioned institutional exercise of implied control over college students. And free speech and the ability to tolerate offense are the hallmarks of a free and open society. These are some of the things that she wrote in her email response. However, what she didn't know was that her response would also go to the student body. When the student body read and interpreted the email, they interpreted the email as support for racist costumes. Erica and her husband, who also taught and was a residential life director at Yale, ultimately, Christakis resigned. And her husband, he took a sabbatical for a year, then he resigned. Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, writes about this very same incident. And he says that it's in our own mental prototype, or it's in the student's mental prototype, to think of themselves in two types of groups, victim or oppressor. And everyone is placed into one box or the other. This revealed much about what Ivy Leagues have turned into in America. And when we say Ivy Leagues, we mean Harvard, Yale, Brown. It also revealed how many Gen Z have come to see the world, or their worldview of America. Is it victim or is it oppressor? We might also look at the Berkeley riots in 2015 and 2016 in the wake of Donald Trump's winning the presidency. We also saw schools like Middlebury become violent, in which a speaker was assaulted while attempting to flee the campus. What are some conclusions we should draw from campus violence against the American value of free speech? Specifically, how does all of this work with Gen Z? Again, Dr. Haidt writes about the effects of tribalism on all of our minds, not just Gen Z. Again, in his book, he points out several ideas. One idea that he grapples with is Henry Tajfel's idea of minimal group paradigm. Now, Tajfel served in World War II. His family was murdered by Nazis, and he wanted to understand the conditions under which people would discriminate against members of an outgroup. Now, there's two types of groups in these types of studies, in-groups and out-groups. So he conducted a series of experiments. And he divided people into two groups based on trivial and arbitrary criteria. What does that mean? It means that the way that he divided them, it just didn't matter. So an example is each person first estimated the number of dots on a page. So he gave them a piece of paper, had so many dots, and he was like, okay, estimate how many dots are on the page. And half of the people who participated in this experiment were told that they had overestimated the number of dots, and they were put into a group of overestimators. The other half went to underestimators. Seems simple enough. Then he asked participants to distribute points or money to all the other subjects. So if you're an overestimator, then you need to distribute points or money to underestimators and vice versa. And no matter how trivial or minimal these arbitrary separators, people tended to distribute whatever was offered in favor of their in-group members. So if you're an overestimator, you give most of the points and money to other overestimators. If you're an underestimator, you give most of the points and money to your fellow underestimators. What's the point? The point is the human mind is prepared for tribalism. And human evolution holds that the story of individuals competing with other individuals is what drives us as we evolved throughout the ages. This also includes groups competing with other groups. So we compete individually, we also compete collectively as groups. And sometimes we compete violently. This can be known as tribalism. And the question is, how do we deal with conflict from other tribes? Because in our human minds, we can flip the tribalism switch on pretty easily. And it causes us, when we flip this switch, to bind closer to our other tribal members. The great thing is that the human mind can be conscious of tribalism. That means we can control it, and we can choose not to become angry. We can choose not to become angry when the people that we consider part of our in-group fraternize with those we might consider the enemies. So if you're an overestimator and you see your buddy Joe fraternizing with an underestimator, you can choose not to become angry. You can turn the tribalism switch off. And the goal of a community is to turn down everyone's tribal circuits. What happens when a college community emphasizes distinctions among groups and claims that distinctions are not trivial or arbitrary? And as well, tell everyone that they are engaged in a zero-sum conflict. It's all or nothing. It's this tribe or no tribe at all. This leads to the point that there are two kinds of identity politics that feed into our tribalism. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with identity politics, it is the political mobilization organized around group characteristics such as race, gender, and sexuality, as opposed to party ideology or some other interest. The point is, everybody does it. An example would be ranchers banding together to promote the interests of ranching. The LGBTQ community, they bandied together to promote the interests of their community. Evangelical Christians bandied together to promote the interests of their group. I'm just looking for more ways to use the word bandy at this point. So how identity is mobilized makes an enormous difference. Sometimes it's fighting for general welfare of group members or creating hatred for another group. What we want our Gen Z generation to grasp, especially if they're going through university, is we want them to understand the mobilization attitude and strategy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He led a political movement, largely of African Americans, and joined by others, engaged in nonviolent protests. He appealed to the shared morals and identities of Americans, unifying languages of religion and patriotism. So he used phrases like brothers and sisters. These are the words of Jesus Christ. So he appealed to the religious sentiments held in Americans, but he also knew how to connect with the patriotic elements that Americans hold in their hearts. So he appealed to America's founding documents, where it too has a sense of religious fervor to it. And King evoked the framers and founding fathers and made clear his movement was not to destroy America, but to heal it. We also might consider another figure from the 1950s, Pauli Murray, who was an African American and queer Episcopal priest and civil rights activist. Quote, "I intend to destroy segregation by positive and embracing methods. When my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. Where they speak out for the privileges of a puny group, I shall shout for the rights of all mankind." And this type of language is seen almost 60 years later in the Marriage and Equality Act of 2012. Again, Gen Z sees the world through the lens of, am I safe? That's what we ask here at the Institute for Generational Dynamics. And it's possible in our hypercharged environments like American college campuses, which our American college campuses by nature become a microcosm of its own. It becomes its own small town and can become excluded or exclusive to the rest of the community around it. Gen Z individuals who are tribal thinking come to think that violence is the only way to preserve their safety. So we're going to switch gears to the fact that Gen Z wants less connection. So Gen Z, America's first internet native generation, a generation that grew up in a world where they received their first phone, likely an iPhone, around age 12, when social media began to evolve and take over everyone's lives. GFK, Consumer Life, asked millennials and Gen Z who wants to be always reachable. The answer? Millennials. Millennials want to be always reachable. In fact, 71% of millennial women want to be always reachable, compared to about 66% of Gen Z women. So a 5% difference, not necessarily super significant. But on the other hand, 74% of millennial men want to be always reachable, so about the same as millennial women, compared to 57% of Gen Z men. That's 17%, that's almost 20%. That is a much larger number. Another way of putting it is 3 out of 4 millennial men want to be always connected, while less than 3 out of 5 Gen Z men want to be always connected. Now, some experts would say the reason for this is tech fatigue, the term tech fatigue. And experts say Gen Z is simply not as excited about tech anymore compared to millennials and older generations. Whereas we may see tech as novel, those of us who are millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers, early millennials like myself, we may see technology as novel. Gen Z grew up with it. They're internet native. They've always been surrounded by technology. There's a ubiquity to it. What's also interesting is that while Gen Z women use tech and social media more than men, Gen Z women have greater concerns about safety and privacy online. That's paradoxical. Gen Z women have greater concern about safety and privacy, but want to be more reachable and want to be more connected. So what is Gen Z using their tech time for? Well, it's to purchase products. And one of the products Gen Z likes to purchase is called athleisure or athleisure. I like to say leisure personally, makes me stand out. I didn't even know that athleisure was a word outside the bounds of Little Odessa weapons traffickers on Coney Island. So I didn't even know this was a word. But the companies that are dominating the athleisure space is Nike, American Eagle, Adidas, Hollister, and PacSun. This is who Gen Z really likes. Nike actually controls 42% of the sports brands market for Gen Z. Vans and Adidas make up the other 3. So, as we say around the Institute for Generational Dynamics, Gen Z is poised to be the most materialistic generation since the baby boomers. And luxury brands are cashing in on Gen Z's wanton materialism. So brands like Michael Kors, Louis Vuitton, Coach, Kate Spade, Gucci, these brands are cashing in. However, since 2006, the average spending on luxury accessories decreased from $197 to $90 in 2018. That is a dramatic decrease in spending. What does this mean for products Gen Z purchases? It means that Gen Z wants the products, they're just able to buy less of the products they want. This makes sense since the majority of Gen Z are still in their teenage years and not in the workforce. But the key takeaways are that Gen Z is drawn to these products of athleisure and luxury. So the key takeaways are that Gen Z is drawn to brands that produce athleisure and luxury brand items. It plays right into their wanton materialism, and organizations would do well to focus in on these types of brands. Finally, we want to bring part of Facebook's strategy for marketing to Gen Z to our listeners and viewers of the podcast. If you're a marketer on Facebook, you spend a lot of advertisement dollars. If you're a marketer on Facebook, you spent a lot of advertisement dollars marketing to millennials. But guys, come on, it's time to shift gears. Age 24 and below, Gen Z is coming into focus. And Facebook estimates that Gen Z is influencing the American economy to the tune of $143 billion. So what are the key trends Facebook hopes marketers like yourself pick up on to maximize your ads and products to Gen Z? Well, there's 3 keys that we want to report, and the first key number 1, is diversity. Oddly enough, for the perceptions of baby boomers and Gen X, Facebook's report, quote, Gen Z often sees its diversity as an asset. This is the most diverse generation in U.S. history, and its members like seeing representation beyond conventional constructs. In fact, 7 out of 10 Gen Z say they would like to see more diversity in advertising. Gen Z's dedication to embracing all lifestyles influences how it expects to be represented in the media, end quote. To illustrate Facebook's assertion on using diversity as a marketing tool, Facebook points to clothing retailer ASOS specifically. ASOS created a youth-focused fashion line called Collusion. Now that's an odd name in the era of polarized politics and Donald Trump, but Collusion focuses on its brand being first sustainable, second animal free, and third gender fluid. 2 out of 3 respondents to a poll pushed on an Instagram Stories ad reported that clothes should not be gendered. 2 out of 3 respondents said clothes should not be gendered, which provided insight into what customers want and guidance for the retailer's concepts. If you're a clothing manufacturer, be gender neutral. If you're a retailer, position your displays or online products as gender neutral and diversity inclusive. Furthermore, help Gen Z consumers see the products interacting with inclusion and diversity concepts with people. Okay, key number 2, communications. Gen Z gravitates towards brands that participate in group discussions. Let's elaborate with what Facebook said. Quote, while they prize their individuality, Gen Zers also crave the connection that communities create, which may explain why there are over 10 million plus groups on Facebook with 1.4 billion using them every month. In other words, Gen Zers like the idea of less public discussion provided in groups on specifically the Facebook platform. Facebook believes in their research enough they created the ability for a page to join groups, which means businesses can participate in group discussion. However, if a brand's page is going to interact in the group, it needs to add value, not product blasts, not biases. Again, this goes back to Gen Z's need for authenticity. Quote, by offering Gen Zers things like exclusive experiences, behind-the-scenes content, or opportunities for collaboration, you can connect with Gen Zers through the interests, passion, and causes that drive them. So, which sectors of business would benefit from linking their page to a group? Well, we've got 3 specifically: automotive, banking, and food. Finally, key number 3. Key number 3 is do good causes. Gen Z consumers want to rally to movements and causes that benefit the greater good. They also want their brands to do the same. If you're a fan of Milton Friedman, that means Milton is rolling around in his grave and you are pulling your hair out. Nevertheless, 3 out of 5 Gen Z say they would pay more for products that are produced in an ethical and sustainable way. About 4 out of 5 Gen Z say they would feel more positive towards a brand when it promotes gender equality on social media. And a little less than 1 out of 2 Gen Z say they feel represented in the ads they see when it comes to diversity. From all the research out there, Gen Z are increasingly aware of how products are first sourced and 2, the company's stance on the issue of sourcing. What should advertisers do? Advertisers should highlight a stronger connection of a business with such movements. An example would be Starbucks' promotion of diversity inclusion and diversity through advertisement placement on their website and in their stores. According to Ranker's top LGBTQ companies, you may want to analyze companies such as Levi's, Target, and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. As we've discussed before, companies need to make sure they appear authentic, which seems paradoxical that a company seeks to prove to its consumers that it is authentic. But we're constantly falling for social media platforms that try to prove to us the purpose of the platform is to be social and not monetization. What is for sure, choose your platforms wisely. Instagram and Snapchat are still the larger influencers to Gen Z. TikTok is currently too clunky with few to no data analytics to draw from. Wouldn't be it would not hurt to be on TikTok and begin creating content. But at this time, TikTok is not going to give you feedback but at this point, TikTok is not going to give you data that you can really use to understand your customer base. So, key takeaways. Be diversity inclusive. Have a cause connected to your brand. Be authentic when communicating that cause. And stick to Insta and Snap where your Gen Z audience is. Well, thank you so much for being with us on the Gen Z Deep Dive podcast.